Good morning, News Talk 1330 WLBB. Adam Uglum here hosting the Community Voice program, and politics is always the topic when I host the program, at least solo anyway. I've hosted all the programs this week due to Colin having the cooties. He normally shares in the interviews and things we do on the other Community Voice programs, but a couple times a week, usually I get to talk about politics, and you get the opportunity to call in and weigh in. A lot of you call afterwards. Since we are kind of limited on time, it's only a half-hour program, and it's hard to fit a good substantive bit of topic into just half an hour and manage to squeeze in phone calls, because they do take up quite a bit of time as well. But anyway, today is Friday. I usually host the program on Tuesday and Thursday, but scheduling sometimes changes things. Let me throw away my news here. Not that it's worth throwing away, just that I don't need to look at it while I'm trying to tell you what I'm trying to tell you today. So the debate was last night, the GOP debate in Florida, hosted in Jacksonville last night, and it was honestly a very good debate. I've said before on the program that CNN does the best job with the debates. Fox probably coming in at a close second. ABC does an absolutely terrible job with the debates, and MSNBC, they're even worse. Anyway, the debates, always kind of fun. The one before this one last night was honestly quite bad. The one last night was very good. I'm not really sure what to make of Mitt Romney and Gingrich going at each other's throats like they are. I'm not sure that's really good for either of them, because the impression that I got watching the debate was that ultimately both of them kind of looked like the same person, except, Gingrich was obviously the Washington insider and Romney kind of sort of the outsider. But both of them have a big history, a long history of big government conservatism, at least to a degree. Now, Newt Gingrich, while it's easy to call him a big government conservative, he's probably not as much of a big government conservative as Romney. Gingrich is certainly pragmatic. I think while Gingrich may believe in certain things, he also understands the political reality, too. I may want to completely remove income taxes and repeal the 16th Amendment. I know that politically that isn't going to happen anytime soon. So we have to find some kind of middle ground to get us towards that goal. In political science, we call this incrementalism, is what it's referred to, where you kind of do things piecemeal over a long period of time to get your accomplished end goal. Radical change, like gun control policy, things like that, does not tend to work or bode well at all. Not to mention interest groups tend to take a much larger role, especially with the NRA being powerful. For example, I mentioned gun control. Do not mess with gun control at all. The status quo will be upheld, or the NRA will destroy you. But anyway, so the debate's certainly very interesting. I think Santorum certainly kind of won the debate in that he kept his head above the fray. And at one point, Santorum said, look, what's going on right here, Mitt Romney and Newt Gingrich, battling back and forth over personal attacks, is awfully distracting. And Newt Gingrich has said this from the very beginning. Newt Gingrich early on promised that it would be a positive campaign for him until he got lit up by negative campaigning. And as much as we don't like negative campaigning, it works. That is the simple truth, really, when it boils down to politics. Negative campaigning works. It's ugly, but it works. It worked very well in New Hampshire for Mitt Romney. Didn't work so well in South Carolina. Newt Gingrich had a lot going for him in South Carolina. He managed to maintain, but he also had two great debate performances before the primary, which helped him quite a lot. So it'll be interesting to see who wins the Florida primary, which I believe is next Tuesday, and see the outcome of that. I would like to see, honestly, Ron Paul win, because that would be very interesting, to have four primaries where you have Rick Santorum winning Iowa, Mitt Romney winning New Hampshire, Newt Gingrich winning South Carolina, and Ron Paul winning Florida. Now, I know the chances are awfully slim that Ron Paul will win Florida. I'm just saying, as a political scientist, that would be interesting to see that happen. It would certainly cause quite an upset with one state for each candidate. Ron Paul actually got to speak last night, too. Speaking of Ron Paul, that was kind of nice, actually. I think Ron Paul's biggest problem is not that his policies are so much bad, but it's more that Ron Paul is not as smooth and savvy as Gingrich and Romney are. Ron Paul certainly has his moments, but he's certainly not as eloquent a speaker as anybody else on the stage. So then we get into this whole thing. Do we really want a president who's just a good speaker and nothing else? Look what that got us with this guy. Speaking of speeches, we all know the media likes to present President Obama as 7 times brainier as George Bush. Oddly enough, Politico released this story first. Lots of pundits will say that Fox News released it first in their slanted arguments against this report, but Politico was actually the first one to release this. According to the Flesch-Kincaid readability test, President Obama's State of the Union address, again, rated as an 8th grade comprehension level, the third lowest score of any State of the Union address since 1934. University of Minnesota, Smart Politics Initiative are the ones who conduct the analysis on the last 70 State of the Union addresses and found that President Obama's 3 addresses have the lowest grade average of any modern president. Obama came in 13th out of 13. George W. Bush was number 8. In the report, it finds that each of Obama's 3 addresses are among only 7 of 70 in the modern era that were written shy of a 9th grade level, and among the 6 that have averaged less than 17 words per sentence. Obama's 2012 and 2010 addresses averaged 16.6 words per sentence, with his 2011 address coming in at 16.8. Now, the Flesch-Kincaid test, what it does, it's designed to assess the readability level of written text with a formula that translates to score a U.S. grade level. Longer sentences and sentences utilizing words with more syllables, for example, produce higher scores. Short sentences and sentences incorporating more monosyllabic syllabic words yield lower scores. Obama's average grade score is 8.4. That's more than 2 grades lower than the 10.7 grade average for the other 67 addresses written by his 12 predecessors, they conclude. Obama's use of simple language is in part reflection of his audience. The American voter in an election year is what this speech was aimed at. It's all part of a larger trend in simpler State of the Union language as the speech has transitioned in America from a simple language to a primetime televised event. So there's a lot going on here, too. It's very easy to say that President Obama is clearly trying to speak to his core base. It's an election year. He's dumbing things down because that's his core audience. I'm sure that's part of it. There's another part, too. The English language is being simplified, for good or for bad. Now, there's also the people who prescribe to the notion that a more complicated speech just kind of bores people. Maybe that speaks to the problems with the intelligence of the country, too, and how poor the schooling is. Reading is not America's strong suit. That's an interesting thought, too. School has been awful. Public schooling has been awful in this country for 40-plus years. It was getting better for a long time. But since we established the Departments of Education, National Education Board statistics all tell us that education has gotten no better in the last 40 years. We've spent a whole lot more, that's for sure. But education hasn't gotten any better. So again, there's a lot of ways to look at this, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. There's a lot of folks out there who say that you want to keep the readability score as low as you can for a speech because it's just easier to digest. People don't get bored when they're watching it. So it looks like we have a caller on line 2 that reminds me the telephone number is 678-601-8255 if you'd like to call and be part of the program. Good morning. You're on the Community Voice. Hello.
Hello? Hello?
Hello. Hey, how are you?
Hey, you're talking about education. And I just wanted to, I know that you don't like government education, but government education got my disabled son in school by 3, diagnosed. He is so much more advanced than he would have ever been if there wouldn't have been a public education. So there is good in public education.
How do you know that there's not? And I have a problem with government education. I have no problem with government funding education. There's a big difference. I think that states do have an obligation, and local municipalities, counties, and cities do have an obligation to pay for schooling. It's probably the most effective means of efficiently producing an education system. Now, that doesn't mean I think the state should run education. I think that your disabled student should get extra money and get into school early. I'm not saying that he shouldn't get those things. Okay. I'm just saying that a private school system would be able to accommodate that as well. So I think you're just misunderstanding me with that regard.
There are hardly any private schools that have openings for special education.
There's hardly any private schools at all. But the reason being is because we pay for public schools out of taxes and we don't have school choice at all. I mean, the cost of education for per year for a student at Carrollton City Schools, for example, is $8,000 per year. Now, let's say, for example, that you could go to the state and say, look, it costs $8,000 a year to pay for the education of a student at Carrollton High School. I would rather put my student in a private school. Can I have $8,000? And that's the way the school system should work. It's the way it works in several states around the union that all have really good education systems.
Okay, I get your point.
I mean, would you like a system like that where you could say, I want to send my student, my child, where I want to? Can I get a check equivalent to the amount the state spends on public schooling?
Well, I do have a voice in the special education because, we're very involved with the school, and we can request therapies and services in the school.
No, I didn't say that you couldn't do that. I'm just saying you don't have a choice in where you can send your child as much as you would if we had a voucher system where you could.
Special education, you do, as far as in the county of Carroll County. I could put my son in any school I wanted.
No, you can't. Not with your tax dollars.
If I provide transportation.
Correct. Not with your tax dollars, though. They won't give you money to send your kid to a private school if you want to.
Well, private schools don't have special education available.
But I'm saying they would if you had a voucher system. If there were a market created by a voucher system, which happens in the state of Maine, for example, which has, I think, the third or fourth best education in the country. They have a voucher system. Any parent can go to the state and say, look, I want to put my kid in private school. Okay, here's a check for $12,000. And there are many more private schools per capita in Maine because there's a market for it, because more parents have more choices and more money to spend on education.
And then it would make the schools compete to do better.
Correct.
So
Private,
want your
exactly.
Kids. That's
Public
kind
schools.
Of a commerce point of view. That's a good idea. Thank you for changing my mind. And also about Obama and him dumbing down the speeches. That's so the Tea Party can understand.
So the Tea Party can understand.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't aware the Tea Party was extremely.
If you watch the South Carolina debates and the ignorance that they showed in picking Newt Gingrich, you have to dumb it down so they can understand.
So why is it ignorant for us to pick Newt Gingrich at South Carolina? What does that say about the South Carolina voters?
Well, personally, my biggest deal with Newt Gingrich is I want a first lady, not a first mistress. So,
okay. Well,
you have a good day.
So you haven't read much about Obama's affairs when he was younger either, I guess.
I know enough about Obama to know that if we gave an idiot 8 years to crush us, let's give this man 8 years to try to lift us.
Look, I didn't like Bush at all either.
The economy's doing better.
You must not listen to my program very much because I don't like Bush either.
I listen to your program every day.
Okay. Well, I don't like Bush. If that hasn't been made clear.
Yes, it has.
Okay.
Okay. You have a good day.
You too. I appreciate the phone call. All right. We must take a break. Again, if you'd like to be part of the program, please do feel free to give me a phone call. The number is 678-601-8255. And I really do appreciate the phone call. It is very brave of you. I'm sure you know this is a very conservative county. So I really do appreciate the insight. And I wasn't trying to change your mind. I was just trying to make a point. And I'm glad you do agree that school choice is a good thing. And I think there is a school choice movement that's sweeping the nation. And I think parents do. And students. The money for education needs to follow the student, not the government. Parents need to have that choice. Students need to have that choice. And competition is a good thing when it comes to education because good schools need to get good students. And giving government a monopoly on schools does not enable good students to go to good schools. And getting parents involved is a very good thing. And with a special education child, you need to be very involved, more involved than most parents do. And I'm sure it's very hard. I have no doubt about it that it's very hard. I've got several friends who have special needs children, and it's not an easy life. Not an easy life at all. We'll be right back after the break. The sponsor of the program is Tanner Health System. Okay, I couldn't let this go, to be honest. So I have to come back from this, or go back to this, coming back from the break. You mentioned that Barack Obama had to dumb down his speech for the Tea Party, and my thought over the break was, well, hold on a second. Wasn't this a State of the Union address to the country, not a State of the Union address to the Tea Party? I wasn't aware the message was explicitly catered to the Tea Party. And to mention the idiot we put in the White House, I will mention that Flesh Kincaid, the University of Minnesota, using this test, puts Barack Obama at 13th, which is one spot behind George W. Bush, which is one spot behind Bill Clinton, who is one spot behind Ronald Reagan. As a matter of fact, the best, most intellectual speech givers were both Democrats. Or excuse me, one Democrat, John Kennedy, and then Republican Eisenhower, then Republican Nixon, and then FDR. is next, with Gerald Ford following that. So there's a pretty good mix of Republicans and Democrats here, and John Kennedy was an absolutely brilliant man. I think he was probably one of the best speakers, and most political scientists who analyze speeches will tell you that John Kennedy was arguably one of the best speakers in the nation's history. So if we're going to talk about this whole dumb down the speech for Tea Party thing, so let's do this. Let's take Mitch Daniels' response to the Flesch-Kincaid Readometer and see what he scores. Governor Daniels delivered, I'm not sure if it was the GOP response or the Tea Party response. If you plug in the text of Mitch Daniels into the same test that they used for Barack Obama's State of the Union speech, his score was grade 14. That's just about, it's 5.6 grade levels higher than Barack Obama's speech. So was his speech catered to Democrats since they're so smart? I'm not really sure where that logic falls. And here are the last lines of his speech. We will advance our positive suggestions with confidence because we know that Americans are still a people born to liberty. There is nothing wrong with the state of our union that the American people, addressed as freeborn, mature citizens, cannot set right. So if you've heard that and not read it, maybe you're not catching on. But he's saying that Americans are born free. Now, the president in his State of the Union speech said the word freedom once, the word liberty once, in the entire hour and a half almost speech. Is that the kind of speech we want our president to deliver? He said the word I 47 times in that speech. That's not including personal pronouns. So I think he also probably scores pretty high on the narcissistic meter. Just saying. I'm not a fan of the establishment at all. I mean, I'm a libertarian. It's kind of cheating because I can stand on both sides and say they're both dumb and they're both wrong. But I also believe in freedom and opportunity. I do believe in a core set of principles that most Americans do share. I just don't necessarily believe in the establishment because, by and large, the American people don't participate in the political process and don't understand and don't care. And that's one of the problems that this country has. I do have to take a quick break, and we'll get into one more thing before we head out of the program today. I do appreciate the phone call, but I'm just trying to wrap my head around the logic that the president catered his speech to the Tea Party. That was kind of a low shot. I mean, here I am with facts and statistics about speeches using an objective test, supposedly. I don't know much about Minnesota State University. I wasn't aware it was a very biased college. But we'll be back after the break, and we'll grab one more topic before we run here. Okay, I was right. I'm not sure I can let it go. If we're going to talk about the whole Bush-Obama argument, look, Bush was not a fantastic president. However, we do have to respect the fact that throughout his 8 years in office, we had an average unemployment rate of 5.5%. Now, towards the end of his term, the workforce started shrinking too, which also actually helps him in that regard too, because the economy was still doing okay as the workforce shrank. So here's a lot of common talking points. Unemployment rate 8.5%. That's down from where it was. But we also have to consider that the workforce is 4 million people smaller than it was when he came into office. It's actually 6 million people smaller than when the recession began. So if there were as many people working today as there were when Barack Obama came into office, the unemployment rate would actually be about 11%, depending on who you look at. Some people say 10.5%, some say 12%. If we go back to the beginning of the recession, if we're going to say that Obama's here to fix the recession, it's been 3 years that he's been in office. And recessions aren't an easy thing to fix. Jimmy Carter actually probably did the best job fixing the recession by appointing Democrat Paul Volcker to the Federal Reserve and shrinking the money supply, causing inflation, which was what was needed because we'd had far too low of inflation for far too long. But that's a topic for another day. There's another topic with 1.6 million jobs being created with no GOP help either. Anything passed this year or last year was passed with GOP help, considering that the GOP does control the Senate, and I'm sure bills aren't passed on party line in the House either. Again, it's really easy to just pick one side and that's it, but it's a lot more complicated than that as well. Jobs created is an awfully nebulous point of fact, especially when we consider that in the time period where 1.6 million jobs were created by looking at monthly job growth reports, you also have to consider that businesses are still firing people at a pretty large rate, too. That's not accounted for in unemployment rate statistics. When we look at the month and say, oh, look, the private sector added 11,500 jobs this month. which was what one of the monthly reports was. Or look, the private sector added 75,000 jobs this month. Isn't that great? Well, it's not really, because just to keep up with population and immigration, you have to create about 200,000 jobs per month. So we're still kind of flat when it comes to the economy. And at what cost, too? Now, certainly a lot of this debt that we clearly have, we have a fresh reminder every day that the debt is a big deal. And that's probably why people care so much and why people are becoming far more politically active than they ever have been. President Bush presided over about $4 trillion of debt growth during his 8 years in office. Here we are 3 years into President Obama's presidency, and he's accrued just shy of $6 trillion in debt in 3 years. A lot of that was automatic. However, the federal budget has grown substantially. One of the worst deficits we had under President Bush. Now, remember, the president is responsible for drafting the budget. The House does not have to follow it. The Senate does not have to follow it either. However, the president's budget every year since he's been in office has been a $1 trillion and now $1.8 trillion deficit. Bush never once signed a budget that had a deficit larger than $400 billion, and now every year we have a $1 trillion deficit. Medicare Part D is a big part of that. We've expanded entitlements in the Bush presidency. Bush was a statist by and large. If you remove the Bush tax cuts, there's a lot of things Bush did to reduce school choice, to increase the size of government. The federal employment numbers rose more rapidly under President Bush than they did under our current president. So that is an issue that Republicans have to deal with too. Democrats and Republicans today are far more alike than they are different, which is one thing that needs to be a stark reminder to all Democrats who listen to the program and all Republicans who listen to the program. Now, economic recovery is supposed to be underway. Everybody mentions quarterly GDP growth, which is interesting to me because it's always funny to hear the labor reports. Oh, well, unemployment unexpectedly rose this month to 175,000 jobless claims every month. It is unexpected. Well, economists didn't expect this kind of rise in unemployment claims. Unemployment unexpectedly rose this month. So what does quarterly growth look like? Second quarter of 2009, 0.7% minus quarterly growth. 2009 third quarter, 1.7% growth. 2009 fourth quarter, 4% growth in the fourth quarter. Again, Christmas. 2010 first quarter, 2.5% growth. 3.5% second quarter. Third quarter, 2.5. Fourth quarter, 2.3. Still pretty anemic, considering that 3% growth is pretty average for a healthy economy. For a weak economy, you need to grow at 3.5% to 4% to really get yourself out of the slump. It's not been all that great of a track record so far in terms of economic growth. Again, we have a caller with about 4 minutes left in the program. Good morning. You are on the Community Voice. Line 2, hello. Good morning. You're on the Community Voice.
Good morning, Mr. Adam. How you doing this fine morning?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. Hey, I was just listening to the lady talk to you just a minute ago, and that's a typical Democrat talking point. She's voting her paycheck from the government's what she's voting, and it's talking down to the Tea Party. That's nonsense. The Tea Party is way more educated than the Democrat Party.
Well, actually, you actually do prove a point. I don't know if it necessarily boils down to education, but Republicans on average do make more money, which is also much more closely tied to education than anything else. So you do kind of make a valid point.
Absolutely. That was nonsense. That's a typical Democrat party, and 90% of them vote their government check is what they do. You know, oh, we're afraid of Republicans getting into office because our government check's going to be cut down, and that's what it boils down to.
Well, and you say government check, too, but the government check not only makes it's easy to call it welfare and things like that, but government check also boils down to her situation with her child, too. She's awfully worried about her kid, and she wants a government program, which she had to begin with, and she wants to keep it.
That's what I'm getting at. It all boils down to the paycheck, that somebody else needs to take responsibility to do the business that they should be taking care of themselves.
Well, and that's the thing, is that ultimately we are all self-interested. It's a core part of human nature. And whether you're self-interested to take from someone else via the government or self-interested in driving your own success, it's a core philosophy that people often differ in. And I don't blame people one bit. If the government helped them, they're obviously going to support that type of program. Now, many people are I don't want to call it fortunate because I don't believe in superstition or luck or things like that, but generally people are better off the freer they are. And history has long proven us that, and I'll probably have to do a program on that and look at the freest countries in the world and see how they've done in the last couple of centuries.
Absolutely. America wouldn't be around 230 years if it wasn't free. I mean, and they can't seem to get that through their head, though. I mean, you know, everything in life, on the Democrat side, everything in life that happens is always somebody else's fault. They never want to take responsibility for their own actions.
Can't say I don't agree with you.
Well, it sounds like to me the apple didn't fall far from the tree, but unbelievable, brother. Unbelievable. You have a lovely day.
Thank you. I appreciate the phone call. And we have another caller on line 3, and I'd be happy to talk to you after the program, but I've got about 30 seconds left before I have to close the program. So if you do want to hold on, I'll be happy to address any concerns you have once we get off the air here. But with just a minute left, there is one thing I do want to emphasize, that things are far more complicated than the way the news portrays them to us. My listening audience is by and large a smart bunch of folks, no matter what your political affiliation is, because by and large the country does not pay attention to politics, economics. We're largely all educated by government schools, which is not a good thing. Now, government funding education, totally different, as I addressed early in the program. But since we established the Department of Education in 1970, schooling has not gotten much better. We spend 4 times what we used to. There are twice as many adults per student now in public education, and end of graduation exams using the same standard, according to the National Education Board statistics, have been flatlined. We don't even grade science. We haven't been grading science for, I think, 8-10 years now on that program, but math and English have been pretty flat the last 40 years. You would think with all this technological innovation, we'd have some improvement. Check out the website, the program available later today on YouTube, libertariat.wordpress.com.